It's a skill to bring comfort to an audience when presenting something that is incredibly discomforting. Witnessing a horror show that would have you dwelling on the thoughts of suffering within a fate that is far worse than being a victim of a monster or a knife-wielding maniac. Witnessing it behind a screen within the comforts of your own home. But what if, one day, your home decides to turn against you, deprive you from the feeling of comfort, safety, and security? Not through means of your home being possessed by the supernatural or infected by a stalker that likes to hide within the walls. Them creepy stories. Oh no. We want to see an unremitting horror, an act of Mother Nature giving a performance that will have us cringe at the sight of decay within a place we like to call home, to panic when there's a burning itch that needs to be scratched. Yes, my friends, I am not here to scare you. I'm here to make you feel very, very uncomfortable. Introduction: Akasaka. A young man who's not only in his early 20s, but a bachelor who had successfully made it on his own with a career job before purchasing a 2-story house. After getting a job, Akasaka was immediately sent overseas to Los Angeles for almost a year. So with his brother Seiji assisting him on finding a renter while he was away, unfortunately, the person that Seiji could find was a Mr. Rogi and his family, a former teacher that Akasaka despised. But regardless of Akasaka's history with Mr. Rogi, Seiji did manage to convince him to let Mr. Rogi and his strange family rent the house and take care of his dog while he was away. And when Akasaka returned home a month earlier than expected, hoping to spend that time relaxing in this house before starting on a new project at work, Akasaka was shocked when finding that Mr. Rogi nor his family wasn't home, also noticing that his pet dog was missing. 10 in the evening. What could a family be doing at this time of night? And where was his dog? When calling his brother to grab a set of spare keys, because of how he lost his key, Akasaka was a bit concerned when Seiji sounded surprised, noticing the nervousness within his tone, and shocked when Seiji mentioned that the dog had just recently ran away. Furious by the fact that Mr. Rogi neglected his responsibilities of taking care of his dog, it was when Akasaka noticed a key on the sidewalk near the telephone booth, which was a tenant's key, just sitting there on the ground for anybody to grab. Akasaka was furious over the neglectful act of his former teacher, the nerve of that man, and also began developing an inner fear of what awaits inside the house. And when Akasaka finally got into the house, greeted by a powerful stench stinging his nostrils, the dense air that filled the rooms, Akasaka was not prepared for what was inside. The entire house was covered with filth. The floors and the walls was stained. Trash, used plates, and dishware scattered everywhere. Even the fridge had food that decayed and molded. It was obvious that this place had been unkept for months. Even the bathtub on the second floor was not only filled with water, but it had this strange black fungus growing from the bottom of the bathtub. It looked like oil spills. When confronting his brother Seiji about the condition of the house, why he never kept his eye on Mr. Rogi, and most of all, Mr. Rogi's current whereabouts, Akasaka assumed that this was Mr. Rogi's idea of getting vengeance for what happened. He knew Mr. Rogi was twisted, but not this twisted. According to Seiji, he was aware that Mr. Rogi left a few months ago, and when learning about the mess, there were plans of hiring a crew to help clean up the house, until Akasaka came home much earlier than expected. After spending the whole night cleaning up the mess, scrubbing the walls and floors, even the black substance that caked the bathtub, a strange type of mold probably. Before going to bed, Akasaka decided to take a bath, rinse himself from the filth that he had cleaned up, hoping to relieve the irritation on his skin, freeing his mind from Mr. Rogi and his despicable act. Mr. Rogi. I bet we're all wondering why Akasaka has a disliking for his former school teacher. Mr. Rogi was a science teacher during Akasaka's years in high school, a strange man who was known for his fascination and vast collection of spores, molds, and fungi. They were very precious to him, a man who was passionate over his research. It was also rumored that Mr. Rogi even created his own fungi. But Mr. Rogi never liked Akasaka, which is why on one day when Mr. Rogi found one of his specimen cases broken, he immediately assumed that Akasaka was the culprit. As a result of this, he beat Akasaka and despised the boy for a long time, until he learned that Akasaka's father was the vice principal of the school. That's when Mr. Rogi dropped his hostility towards Akasaka. It was because of his brother Seiji why Mr. Rogi was the one who ended up renting Akasaka's house while he was in California. Supposedly what happened was that Mr. Rogi's home was destroyed in a fire, and him and his wife and his 2 children, a daughter and an infant son, were living with their relatives. And even though Akasaka was reluctant on having Mr. Rogi be the one to take care of the house, maybe it was because of how hard it was to say no to a homeless family, a man who had no other place to go, a mother with a toddler and an infant son who was covered with a blanket. People who were in desperate need to find some place to live while their house is being repaired. It was a situation that Akasaka did not want to be part of, which is why he felt Seiji was better making decisions like this. And well, I guess Seiji made a terrible decision letting these people into his home while he was away. In a way, Mr. Rogi had finally gotten his revenge. But the following morning, after a decent night of rest, Akasaka is about to realize that his situation is going to get much, much worse. Imagine the tickle that goes up your spine when seeing your precious home rotting away. Realizing how sensitive you are when seeing the walls darken with patches, and confused with knowing that your home is no older than 2 years, no explanation behind the transformation, why your house is being ruined. That's exactly what Akasaka woke up to, a home that was deteriorating, the abnormality within the walls and the structure of the house. Maybe it was because of the dense cool air that was lingering in the house. And for some strange reason, it was worse on the 2nd floor, especially near a room that Akasaka could not get into because of how the door frame was warped. When having a contractor look at Akasaka's house, assuming that there was something wrong with the materials they used when building it, no, the contractor knew that this wasn't because of faulty materials. The only explanation he had for this is due to misuse. But as to the cause of the deterioration, is definitely a mystery. And by the state of the house, this is a serious problem that needed to be fixed immediately, meaning that if the deterioration continues to get worse, this home will not be safe to live in. Unfortunately, because of the lack of manpower, there was nothing that could be done for this house until a month later. When Akasaka had his brother Seiji look at the house, hoping to get some answers behind the transformation, or at least find out what the Rogis were doing while he was away, Seiji, however, was not only shocked when looking at the stained walls and floors, but was reluctant to give the answers that his brother was seeking. What did the Rogis do to this house? And why would they move without notice and leave the house as a mess? Assuming that they moved back to their home after it was rebuilt, and that Akasaka can go and confront them there, have them pay for the damages. Unfortunately, when Seiji learned that the Rogis had left, and had plans of hiring a small crew to clean up the mess, Seiji visited the location where the Rogis used to live, only to discover that their house was never rebuilt. There was nothing there, just an empty lot full of the burnt remains of where the Rogis used to live. A few days later, Akasaka began to feel the burning itch on several areas of his body. His eyes having that burning sensation, the dense air growing more thick, the humidity giving his throat that uncomfortable irritation. His sense of smell was now ruined, unable to suffer from the unbearable stench, and noticing the abnormalities on the walls and the ceiling. The darkened patches had somehow reached the furniture, the bed. Everything was warped, darkened, uneven. Every surface, this strange black substance on it. Upon closer examination, it was mold. But this wasn't any normal fungi. It had to be a new breed of mold, because mold doesn't act like this, infesting an entire house within the time span of a few days. The bathroom and kitchen was in such a bad state that it was now unusable. And for some strange reason, it was worse on the second floor, near the room where Akasaka could not get into. When Akasaka had his brother look at the current state of the house, having this inner suspicion that while he was away, Mr. Rogi may have brought his own breed of fungi, that they've gotten loose and became parasitic, leeching off the house. Seiji was terrified. Just by looking at him, Akasaka could tell that his brother knew something, that there was a reason why he did not want to be in this house, and the only thing that Seiji could say to Akasaka was that he should grab his things and leave immediately. But Akasaka was persistent. He wanted answers from Seiji. And when Seiji refused to say anything else and tried to escape, that was when Akasaka tackled Seiji, pinning down his brother, demanding for him to tell him what happened while he was away. And that was when Seiji finally told Akasaka about that one day when he learned the truth. Before the Rogis came to him about renting Akasaka's home, they were tenants at another house, the same house that supposedly burnt down, meaning that wasn't their home, and that house wasn't burnt down. Turns out that was a fabricated lie. It wasn't until Akasaka left to America when Seiji discovered the truth and decided to confront Mr. Rogi about this deception. But when entering Akasaka's house, noticing that Mr. Rogi and his wife was absent, instead he found the infant son, who was already crawling. That day, when the Rogis came to discuss renting the house, there was a reason why the infant son was covered with a blanket. The child had mold on his skin, all over his body, eating away the flesh and the face. Seiji will never forget that deformed face. And not only was the boy infected, but the eldest daughter too. Since that day, Seiji never returned to the house again. Just waited for the Rogis to leave and hopefully have a hazmat crew clean up the damages before Akasaka got back. That was supposed to be the idea, but that's not the worst part. A couple days ago, when noticing the transformation in Akasaka's home, Seiji decided to check out the house that the Rogis previously rented, and when seeing what became of that house, Seiji pleaded for his brother to leave. Immediately, Akasaka needs to leave, and noticing the fear within his brother, Seiji's fear of mold, or becoming the very thing that haunts his dreams, that was when Akasaka began thinking of the possibility that he too may be infected. Did you know that the amount of wood that is destroyed by mold for each year is greater than fire and termites combined? Now imagine if mold were to find a way to increase that amount of damage, or better yet, find a way to feed on live human flesh. Akasaka never took his brother's advice, and is still living inside that house. And even though he thinks about calling Seiji, hoping that his brother would talk some sense into him, maybe it was because of the strange mold Akasaka lost his will to leave. Make no mistake, Akasaka wants to leave, but his mind is so infected, he can't bring himself into leaving. The house had lost its features, fully transformed into this beautiful nightmare. Now, there are these tubes that are everywhere, on the floor, emitting black smoke that would puff into the air, sitting on puddles of black liquid, the ceiling and walls that had the same black liquid dripping from the tips, and the humidity, the unbearable heat, causing painful irritation to Akasaka's eyes and nose, his lungs contaminated with the vile black liquid that lingered in the air, imagining the mold infecting his insides. Small, thin tubes running throughout his body. Such a horrible thought, especially when feeling his veins tingling with pain. So what caused all this? Akasaka began to suspect the source of this nightmare can be discovered by following the tubes, which were coming from the second floor and right behind the door that Akasaka could not open. But now with the house fully warped by mold, even the door had lost its integrity, its ability to keep Akasaka away from the secret that awaited inside. Sweat began to emit from Akasaka's pores, causing him to claw into his flesh to relieve that burning sensation. What was inside that room explained everything. Before they decided to rent the house, the Rogis were already infected. That sick freak, Mr. Rogi, came here to die. The decomposing bodies of Mr. Rogi, his wife, and even his children. Tubes coming from their mouths, coming from their insides, becoming one with the new breed of life. Itchy. Akasaka's face was so itchy, trying to scratch out the flakes of skin, blood, and mold. Because of the mold reaching his eyes, Akasaka lost his sight. His brain was now infected. Everything was warped. His memories, his identity, are now gone. The only shred of humanity within Akasaka was the fading thought of his brother saving him. But for right now, Akasaka is just going to sit down. Let his body welcome the mold. Let his flesh and the mold become unity, and let the remains of his human self continue scratching and clawing into the new flesh until that rots away.